Welcome to today's show, Politics and Tactics, brought to you by Fire Engineering. Today, I'm here with my co-host, PJ Norwood, who's going to introduce to us our two great guests. PJ?
Yeah, welcome, everybody. This month, we bring back a guest from last month because we didn't expect him to go through what he just went through immediately following our show. So again, Dan Coleman, recently returning from his deployment to Vermont in a USAR deployment. Last month, we had Dan and Zach on talking about Swiftwater Rescue and their training company that they provide Swiftwater training. And immediately following our show, ironically, they got deployed to Vermont. So we felt that it was a great idea to bring him back to give a little briefing, a little follow-up, maybe some tips or tricks and things that they may have learned during their deployment, maybe something that they expected, maybe some things that they didn't expect. But Dan has a lot to share previous to this deployment. I'm sure he even has more. Then we also have Dr. Shelley Wheeler, who's a captain of Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Services in Maryland. In her current position, she's the Public Service Training Academy, where she serves as the In-Service Training Coordinator, Course Training Coordinator, and Special Programs Manager. Captain Wheeler's been with MCFRS for 22 and a half years and been a member of their technical rescue team as well as a USAR member. She has multiple degrees, including her doctorate, and prior to her fire service, she served in the U.S. Coast Guard. So Dr. Wheeler, as he asked us, we can call you Shelley, but out of respect for all your time and effort and education, Dr. Wheeler, thank you for joining us today, but also thank you for your service in the U.S. Coast Guard. I'm sure that often goes kind of overlooked, and not many people realize the impact that the U.S. Coast Guard has. So thank you, and I'm sure that you could also contribute to the conversation, the beginning conversation with Dan as far as the deployment, being a member of the Coast Guard, but also in USAR. So feel free to jump in on that conversation. We look forward to hearing about your article, The Rabbit Hole, Leadership as a Relationship, that you both. But Dan, we'll start with you. How was your deployment?
So it was a memorable experience for everyone involved. Fortunately, a lot of people lost everything, their homes, their businesses. There's a couple of fatalities. So it was a humbling experience, but it was also good for our team to be able to assist Vermont with their disaster. Putting years and years of training and preparation and thousands of dollars worth of equipment to use that's the ultimate goal of what we're doing, right? So putting all that together was very beneficial.
Dan, were you deployed just to Vermont, or did you end up in New York as well?
No, so New York was that was something with Water Training Resources on Sunday night, which didn't turn out to be anything. So Monday, the state was in talks with Vermont the day before because they had put out requests for Swiftwater rescue teams through the EMAC program, which is basically the state has a wide-scale disaster. They have a pending storm. They can go on there and request Swiftwater rescue teams. They can request a loader. They can request ambulances. So it's pretty much like the Amazon for emergency management. So through that program, they had already requested teams from Massachusetts, which is a federal resource. So they were already started, and they also started additional teams from I have it here somewhere, from out west, Midwest area. So initially Connecticut was talking to Vermont, and they recognized the same weather system was going to be coming through our state. So they were holding off on requesting us in case the resources were needed in state. So they kind of let the storm system come through, and Monday morning, the Connecticut leaders were like, all right, Connecticut made out pretty well, and we're not going to be needed here in the current time. So approximately 10 a.m., contact was made with Vermont officials if they still needed resources, and they still needed a Type 3 Swiftwater team. So this encompasses 6 personnel with 2 additional support personnel, and then a laundry list of equipment. So basically Connecticut gave them, this is what we can offer you. This is the cost because it's all reimbursable. And then Vermont accepted this mission ready package that is called. So our team was assembled around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. prepping equipment. Because again, like this wasn't a tropical storm where we can forecast it days and days out. We know it's coming. We can make preparation. This was a rainstorm that just had a tremendous amount of energy and moisture with it. So you have to get food, you have to get water, you have to get ice. So doing all those preparations took a few hours, and we were on the road at about 5 o'clock in the evening. So from there, we do Brattleboro, Vermont, where we refueled, and they sent us north to Berlin, which is right outside the capital of Montpelier.
Were you able to effect any rescues?
Yeah. So when we arrived, it was still there's teams coming in and staging, trying to move resources around where it was best needed. There was still rescues going on and pending rescues. We arrived about 8 o'clock at night, and we didn't get settled until probably 1 a.m. Just getting our equipment we commandeered a bank parking lot and set up our base of operations. So we were, they had us stay the night. 6 a.m. We were activated to start accepting missions. So the first mission of the day, basically everything's broken up into each day. There's separate missions. So we were tasked, a small portion of our team were requested to respond to the town of Middlesex, Vermont. We went with 2 other leaders from one of Vermont's urban search and rescue teams to evaluate a river where it flooded a neighborhood. So the resident in the specific address had called 911 the night before and said that she was laying on top of her kitchen counters and the river was coming through her mobile home. And the decision was made at night that it was too high risk and the river was moving too fast and the waters were coming up very quickly as the dams were being overwhelmed. So they made a decision to wait till morning to effect this rescue. And they also requested helicopters from the National Guard to do a possible air evac. So they sent us out with Vermont to kind of get a lay of the land to see if it was something we could do from a boat operation, which we had to traverse a highway across a bridge that was in question of its structural integrity. So there's engineers on site who were just getting ready to evaluate it. So they kind of used us as the guinea pigs to go across first. And this is Interstate I-89. It's a major highway that was shut down at the time. The only access to this area is from the interstate because all the roads were just completely inundated with water. So we were able to use satellite to kind of get an idea of where we needed to be and where the address was. And once we actually had eyes on this mobile home, it was approximately a quarter to a half mile from the highway across a cornfield. We could see that it was inundated with water and the river was raging on the D side of the building. And then the entire cornfield, about a quarter mile in, was flooded and moving water. So our team kind of made a quick evaluation that it was possible to effect a rescue. So the rest of the team assembled and we launched our inflatable boat off the highway. It crossed through about an 8-foot deep drainage culvert, across a railroad fence, across the railroad, and then into this cornfield. So I was the tillerman on the boat, operating the boat, and then I had 2 other of our Connecticut team members with us. So we made our way to this mobile home, not really knowing what we were going to find when we got there, since it was been 8 hours since the 911 call was made and they couldn't make contact with this occupant. So we approached from the A side of the structure. There's kind of a front porch and the water was up to the windowsills. And there was a really good flow of water throughout the whole area. So as much as we talk about how powerful water is, when you have that much volume of water, I mean, it's literally flowing through this mobile home. Kind of had to turn the boat and power ourselves into the porch and leave the motor in gear to keep us in position until we tied off to the front porch of this residence. And then just a quick knock on the window, and we had a response from somebody inside. So we were able to get the door open and get inside. And the victim was still on her counters with her cats ready to go for evacuation. So we loaded her and her 2 cats into our boat and brought her back to the interstate. And it kind of started evolving from there. That entire neighborhood was still occupied. So the EOC got a 911 call from about a half mile up in that neighborhood. 2 people trapped in their house. So we dropped off the first occupant and then headed upstream to that, trying to figure out which house is which. We're just kind of going off of the shape of the roofs and the color of the siding that we could make out, and off a satellite, because we're coming through backyards. So we're traversing over chain link fences and propane tanks and wellheads and sheds just completely covered by water. So it's very difficult to not do damage to the boat while you're trying to make it out here. And the consequence of losing your boat motor and then getting into this flow of this river, extreme. There's not a lot of backups. There's not a lot of safeties for us to rescue ourselves. So we were able to find the house and came in from the backyard, and we kind of landed into their the top step of their deck that was attached to the house. And they were waiting for us, had their bags packed, ready to go. And then they said, hey, our neighbors just called us and they're trapped too. They're on the 2nd floor and they want to be rescued. So we brought these people back to the highway and then headed back out. They had a dog. So we brought our dog crate with us because we got to take care of the animals just as much as we take care of the people. So we made our way further upstream to this house, evacuated 2 more people and a golden retriever. And we brought them back to the interstate.
I was going to say that's his dog.
Yeah, he was really excited to get back to land, to run around, for sure. But he was a great dog. So that was the morning. It took off quick, and then our boat team kind of took a break, and the remainder of the Connecticut team checked a few more houses in this area to make sure they're unoccupied. But this area that we were in, when Tropical Storm Irene came through in 2011-ish, they were not flooded. So that's the reason why they didn't evacuate, because they said, hey, we made it through Irene. This was the worst it's ever been. And it came up further. So that's why these people.
I know some of our viewers may be questioning one thing that you said. So I kind of want to roll into that a little bit. Is that initially you said they had somebody on the line, but it was at night, and someone made the decision that it'd be too risky to go get that individual at night. Who makes that decision in that risk versus benefit analysis? Because I know most firefighters instinctively are going to say, if we have somebody and they're actually physically on the phone, then isn't it worth risking a lot to save a lot?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure how those decisions are made, but they're done on a state level at that point, since the state had taken over responses for the storm. A lot of these fire departments are small volunteer fire departments with limited capabilities. So that's why they brought these teams in, these strategic areas, to work with the fire departments. But we were acting as the primary rescuers for this. So they were hoping that the river was going to stop rising, and it was going to be less of a risk to do it in the daylight versus a nighttime operation. Enough for them to request helicopters, which our rescues were completed, and the Black Hawk was making their way over that area, which was pretty neat to see as they were evaluating the area.
PJ?
Yeah, Dan, it sounds like a great story, and you guys, obviously represented your team well, but also, Connecticut very well. And I know you guys put a lot of time and dedication into training, and ultimately you never deploy. But being on the receiving end of a couple deployments of the USAR team, you guys do a great job. But the only thing I'd like to maybe turn the conversation a little bit is many of our members that are listening today aren't part of USAR, right? So was there anything that you learned from your perspective that maybe we didn't talk about last time, or maybe something new that you learned that we can bring back to, the company that's working today that may get some thunderstorms this afternoon and have some Swiftwater, or something that's going to occur that they can utilize in their daily responses?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for Connecticut and maybe other areas listening that don't experience flooding, like maybe areas like Florida, Texas, Louisiana experience, is that this could and will happen to us. And if we're not prepared for it, then it's going to be a lot worse than it was in Vermont. Vermont's used to these floods, as bad as they are, but they recognize it, and they have a fantastic system in place for mutual aid. They have dozens of Swiftwater teams that are funded through the state. So they're ready for it. And they do get it, but this weather system easily could have set up over Connecticut, and we're just not there. So in my department here, we're looking at the FEMA flood maps. We have a river that runs through town, so just making that preparation, because we all know that the weather systems are worse and we get more rain. And I mean, July has been the 5th wettest on record already, and we're not done with it yet. So just kind of working with your emergency management and actually preparing for these things to happen, because they are going to happen. I mean, it all goes back to planning, but then all goes back to operationally. Like at a minimum, if you have a river coming through your jurisdiction, you need to have some sort of swiftwater rescue awareness, flooding awareness, just so you know what's expected, what gear you should have, what not to do, and who to call for help. It's really easy to get in a jam with these calls. You're more likely to die in a water rescue related incident than you are a structure fire, just because there's less of these incidents, but they're extremely dynamic. And it's very dangerous to be in these floodwaters.
And we recommended the last time, because there's still a lot of companies out there across America that don't even have life jackets, the very basic fundamental thing that just have right off the bat on your piece of apparatus. And that's something where you can, the politics of this, you can really work with your emergency manager and go outside of the fire department to try to get those funds, either through a grant or through emergency management, to at least get the very basic Swiftwater equipment, like row bag and life jackets on your piece of apparatus, because you don't even need a river. You only need a stream or a significant rain event. I mean, we talked about it on the last Google Hangout, but it's worth repeating. New Haven's surrounded by rivers and the ocean, and yet we lost the ladder truck in a creek when they deployed it improperly years and years ago. They lost it in a creek that has concrete on most sides to it's like a trickle. You can walk right across it probably without getting your feet wet now. But that one day it was raging with the victim and they made the wrong call. So I think every place in America, Connecticut, I think it's our weak spot.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Dr. Wheeler, being on a federal team, and I'm sure you were taking notes, critiquing everything the state team PIO was talking about. You want to weigh in?
Yeah. So what's interesting is we lost a tower here to a culvert. They kind of got stuck, went into a low area, and it was just a rainstorm, and their outrigger got stuck, and we lost a whole tower. It doesn't have to be a stream, and it happens a lot here in Montgomery. Montgomery's resource heavy because we have the FEMA team, so we can go to our warehouse and have that instant backup. And then we also have technical rescue teams, and we have 4 different stations where. We have a Swiftwater team because we're on the Potomac, and we share that with Fairfax. And then we have our 3 spec ops teams where we have water assets there. So we're very, very rich in resources. A lot of it comes down to training because we don't do it all the time. And, from the FEMA side of the deployment, looking at federal, it's to me, I don't know. It's just more moving parts and more things to try to coordinate and more things to try to get work when you get there and get things done and just like a lot of hurry up and wait. So it's just on a larger scale. The bottom line at the end of the day, right, is being able to get there and affect the rescue. And it just, from the FEMA side of things, it can just get a little more complex because you're bringing in all the ESFs and staging, and people just want to get to work, and really easy to get lackadaisical about your surroundings, especially with this flat water rescue, now Swiftwater rescue. There's no true definition of Swiftwater, and now we got these floods, and it's exactly what we were just talking about. You don't know what's underneath them, and you got to make the rescue. So I agree. I think it's much more dangerous than a structure fire, where you can go around and do an assessment and make a more tactical decision. You don't know what's around you. The culverts suck you in. There's just so many things to think about.
And so many recent deaths from first responders. And just to kind of lead off on additional things we learned, being prepared with PPE for your victims is very important. We brought PFDs with us and helmets and our dog crate, but it's something that can easily get forgotten in the moment when you have a real rescue going on. And yeah, you got your kit on, but you don't bring anything for the victim, and then you're going to bring them over these floodwaters without anything to protect them. So that's just something to think about. You get somebody in a flooded vehicle in an intersection, bring them a life jacket, bring them something we can put in. If something happens, a firefighter falls down, gets sucked into a catch basin, at least your victim has some type of positive buoyancy on them. And this was also, there was a incident a couple days ago up in our area in the northwest corner of the state on the Housatonic River, Swiftwater Rescue. Same thing, two victims in the middle of a river, and the team brought victim PFDs and ended up pendulating them back to shore after getting the victims to put the PFDs on. So if we can keep these rescues as simple as possible, keep the victim as safe as possible, it makes it better for everybody. It doesn't need to be a complicated technical rescue. We can keep it simple. For the dogs, we do have canine PFDs. However, we did not take those with us. Had the dog in the crate. If something were to happen, we'd have taken the dog out of the crate and got him out. But that's
make sure it's not Biden's dog, because the dog just bit like 7 agents. So that dog doesn't get a PDF. That dog just stay there, Commander. Stay there. Do you have any I'll ask this to Shelley and then go to Dan. Does USAR or the state, do they give any training on dealing with animals when you gotta, it's one thing grabbing a cat with gloves on, but it's another thing grabbing a dog and putting him in a boat. Is there any specific training when it comes to dealing with?
I can't remember any specific training I did. I left the team about a year and a half ago, but I was tech rescue most of my career. We've never really done any training, honestly. And the other thing, getting away from the animal side of things to keeping it simple. We do have policy too that keeps us away from the river edge, flood edge, whatever. We have policy where we have to be 10 feet away from instructional firefighting gear. So policy helps with a lot of those things. And then the other thing too is something that's real simple to the point of keeping it simple is marking the water line. And marking the water line and using datum. Datum is something that we used for search and rescue, for man overboard or whatever in the Coast Guard, and that has transferred to these water rescues. But being able to mark so if the water's receding and if the person is moving, so the direction that they're moving, so you can set up a plan, plan to because by the time you deploy your boat, depending on what kind of boat you're deploying, they might be moving fast downstream, so you need to kind of be in front of them. So there's those simple things to think about too. So and even from our Swiftwater team trains a lot. They do a really good job. On the USAR world, when we deploy our boats, we usually try to do it once a year. We do quarterly training, but it's something they usually try to hit at least once a year. But once a year is kind of tough. It's not really making you completely prepared with how much more of these water rescues we're making now. So
Dan, on the animal question, do you do any training on how to?
Yeah, we do actually. We utilize it's called ASAR. It's Animal Search and Rescue Specialist. It's a company based out of the U.S. That provides swiftwater rescue training with animals, and they do all sorts of animal rescues. So they're doing rescue training with zoos. They lift rhinos with basically a massive air vortex. But they do all sorts of animal training. So our team about 3 years ago went through the technician program. So it's a lot of the Swiftwater technician skills, but geared towards with you being with that dog, with the cat, with horses, because a lot of these are rural areas. They're coming through farms, so the animals need to be evacuated, but you have to know how to handle these animals so you don't get injured or injure the animal themselves.
Were you saying there's hope for Biden's dog? You'd make
Yeah, something we love for ice rescue, for just having on the rig is an animal catch pole, like an animal control has. So it just has the snare on the end. But for a water rescue, for A majority of ice rescues start off as a dog through the ice or a deer through the ice, and fire department's still going to go because someone's going to go out and get it. So might as well be us. And it's good PR for the fire department. So keeping our personnel 6 feet away from the animal that's fight or flight mode at this point, right? We can control them with this catch pole and bring them to shore, and we have positive capture on them. So we brought that with us to Vermont. It's just one of those things we learned through this ASAR program. To just have control over the animal, because that's the biggest thing is they're biting. You don't want to get bit through the suit. So just a little tidbit there is a catch pole is really handy, especially and even on like a medical call. You get a dog that's protecting its owner and we can't make entry to get to the patient. We got the catch pole in the truck. We can control the animal, get them in a room and lock the door.
I think that's great. One thing before we shift our conversation to Dr. Wheeler's dissertation and recent articles in fire engineering is I want to kind of point out 2 unique training things. One from Montgomery County, and I'm going to date myself, but when I took practical rescue when I was a college living in Montgomery County, one of the most interesting things that I thought some of the coolest training was we went to the power plant in Poolsville as part of practical rescue, and it was in the Sleuth and it was winter, but because of the power plant, the water was warmed, and they trained us in swiftwater rescue and how to respect the water. I thought that was so valuable because you can't learn swiftwater rescue training or water rescue training from a slide, a video, or a presentation. You got to get out and do that. And then to Dan, what's happening in Connecticut, Shelley, if you haven't heard of this is pretty innovative. We've all heard of the FEMA facilities and the national facilities where they have cars and they could flood the area. Well, this is fire department ingenuity. They took a car, took the transmission, took all the fluids out, took the engine out, and they actually handle it I would say manhandle, but I don't know what the other word is. Personnel handle it to put it in the river, and it's just the normal river to do rescue. So Dan, if you could kind of talk about that innovation, and then we're going to move to leadership with Shelley, because I think that's, it motivates people to say, hey, we need to get out of the firehouse and we need to do some quality training with quality instructors.
Teaching Swiftwater classes, we talk about vehicle rescue, and it's great. You can show pictures and talk about it, but unless you're actually doing it, you're not prepared for it. And given that more than 50% of drownings in flood waters occur, persons drowning in their vehicle, and fire departments are going to these all the time. Like, we got to train on it. So we came up with a way to get it in the river and through environmental approvals and really do some realistic training in fast moving waters, evacuating people from inside vehicles on top of vehicles. And our team we got to do a vehicle search and recovery in the city of Barrie on Thursday when we were in Vermont. Vehicle upside down in the river that goes through the city. The waters were coming down, so it started to expose everything that was washed away. So we sent a member over the edge and searched the vehicle, and we rigged it up. We commandeered an excavator, and we're able to bring it up onto the ground and get it out of the river. And then we marked a couple other vehicles that were submerged that had been searched, just so in case they got washed down, someone else didn't search it. Pretty cool. Actually doing it in a real incident was awesome too, and kind of gave us reassurance that we're doing it right for training.
So Dan, how do you mark the vehicles? I know the marking system on like private dwellings, but how do you mark an actual vehicle in those type of conditions on something that's not going to get washed away, so that if that vehicle does get moved downstream, that it stays?
Yeah, we were kind of limited on space on one of them. So all that we're showing was a windshield, but we were able to make sure it was unoccupied. So everything was smashed. So it ended up just being unoccupied and CTTF1, just so they know who searched it. But just an obvious marking that, hey, Connecticut has searched it, and we don't need to send someone in the water again.
We use spray paint, same as you do.
Yeah. So we traveled on day 4 of the deployment. We were in Barrie City doing a windshield evaluation of the city. There's a FEMA tracking program that we were trained in while we were there, basically logging every bit of damage, structural damage, checking out houses, and then also searching vehicles. So we were able to record the exact location of the vehicle. We take a picture of it with the markings on it. So it all gets downloaded and goes to the command post, and it also goes to Washington, D.C. So it's kind of real-time tracking for the disaster, which is awesome.
Very cool.
Dan, thanks for your time.
No
I know
problem.
your time was limited today, but you're a credit to Connecticut Task Force One. We're proud to have you in the state and keep up the great work with training. You're welcome to stay on for the remaining half hour, but what do you call it? Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
PJ, you want to lead off this with Shelley?
So I'd love to, but I'm going to turn it back to you. I'll just give the title of the article. It's a two-part article. It's been published in Fire Engineering that you and Dr. Shelley authored together, called The Rabbit Hole: Leadership Behaviors, Envision, Drive, Organizational Culture. And I'll have to be honest with you, I have not read part 2 and I have not finished part 1. So I apologize for that. Same as your book, Frank, still sitting on the coffee table, not completed just yet. But so I'm looking to learn a little bit about what the article is and what actually brought you guys together to do this article together. You and I have written many articles together, and that's easy because we're close and we're friends. But to stumble across somebody like Shelley with her knowledge and ability to co-write an article is pretty awesome.
Well, I don't know if it was co-written. Shelley, Dr. Wheeler did the heavy lifting, and I added some color commentary. But I think that I don't want to speak for Dr. Wheeler, but anytime, as PJ and I have written articles together, anytime I've written an article with somebody else, I always think it makes the article just a little bit better because it either covers a blind spot or just adds a different perspective, especially when we're looking at geographic locations. The diversity of thought and the diversity of area, I think in itself brings value to any publication. But this article was really based off Dr. Wheeler's dissertation, and then we kind of broke it up and put it in an article. So let's start with Dr. Wheeler. Welcome again, Politics and Tactics. Could you kind of explain what led you to choose this leadership dichotomy or whatever, what led you to writing your dissertation on this type of leadership subject? Maybe would be the best way to say it.
Sure. First, I got to tell you, we're still doing the flume here in Montgomery County. It's still part of the requirement. It's not practical rescue anymore. It's a new name, vehicle machinery, blah, blah, blah. And now they're changing it again, but we still do that. So it's good stuff. So how I got to write about this, I think it was when I decided I was going to do my bachelor's degree years ago. And I started realizing all leadership kept coming up, leadership. And I realized I didn't ever really think of the term much before. So as I went on, I decided to go on my master's degree, and I focused on organizational leadership. I just got more and more into it and realized really to the dichotomy of it and it seems so complex. And then I was, you try to pull it apart and it's like, maybe it's not so complex. There's just so many moving parts. You just can't explain it. There's no singular definition. So by the time I decided for whatever reason to get my doctorate, I think it was just because I was so enthralled with education and learning more. And the more I learned, the more I realized I didn't really know much of anything. When it came time to dissertation, you really got to pick something, your dissertation is an inch wide and a mile deep. And I really needed to pick something I was passionate about. And so I really started going down that leadership trail and what I was passionate about and the fire service and making the fire service better was my passion. And I just feel like the only way to really explain leadership and get to be able to explain all the different the dichotomy of it, the complexity of it that actually isn't that complex at all when you start to tear it apart, was to think of it as this building block approach and how do we train our people. I know in our department it's we do the best we can with what we have, but a lot of times we don't talk about what a leader is until you're an officer, and by that point I thought it was too late. So that's what kind of really started pushing me in that direction.
Now you reached out to neighboring departments and individuals to put forth some information for your dissertation, correct?
Correct. It was actually a pretty big study for one person. It was meant to be 56 different participants from, it was initially, it was from 4 different departments. and I tried to pick from the most junior to the most senior, from the newest firefighter to the most senior chiefs. I interviewed division chiefs and assistant chiefs. So it was 4 different departments from the Metro DC area, pretty large departments. And I was trying to look, is the culture the same, because I wrote about the U.S. Fire Service. And at first my chair and especially my reader was like, they couldn't fathom the U.S. Fire Service and what that meant and why everything didn't just mesh together. And it's like, well, because we're all over the place. And while we're a U.S. Fire Service, each department has its own unique culture. And so it changes it up a little bit. I'll say, and my husband and kids still make fun of me. I'm like, leadership is leadership is leadership. It's the culture that's a little different. And that's where I really started thinking, well, if it's about the culture and a specific department has certain values and expectations, they should be communicating those early and often and throughout somebody's career. So then the concept of what leadership means isn't that complicated. It's like, define it, train your people what it means, make them understand what it means, and then give them the training they need to grow and learn throughout their career. And that's, I didn't think they were going to let me write about the fire service in, the business world, right? But I was able to make the parallel between organizational design and alignment, and being able to use leadership training and the teaching of values with organizational and design and alignment. And that was kind of where it all came together, if that makes sense.
I mean, business leadership is about putting out fires as well. So I can definitely see the parallels and how each can learn from each other. Now, did you learn through your dissertation that one leadership style is the way to go all the time? Like we see on LinkedIn, Twitter, and everybody put in their bio that they're a servant leader. I mean, it's almost becoming as prevalent as putting a flag up of Ukraine, thinking that that individual's making the huge sacrifice of changing their profile picture. Servant leadership has become the buzzword. Is there just one? Is that the one? Could you kind of delve into that?
Sure. No, there's not just one, right? Because if the problem is with a lot of specific leadership theories, as we look at it, is very one-sided. And we kind of wrote about that in our paper, that really we need a process style leadership. And why is that? That's because every individual is different. So as a leader, you have to be able to adapt for each and every person that you lead. And people do not like hearing that. Why? Because it's exhausting, but that's what leadership is. It's exhausting, and you have to adapt. And then I think we wrote in our article about the shepherd and the cowboy, and why we have to lead people different. Some people are stubborn, and there's just some people you're never going to bring along with you. And you try your best. And as a leader, you try your best, and then you hold them accountable and you move on. And but that doesn't mean that you blame everyone else for what one person did, right? So you have to adapt. So yeah, servant leadership is great. I think some of these styles are a good thing to just start basing what leadership is. You can talk about it, but no, there's no one way. When I did the study and compared, I did a qualitative study, because quantitative, what does it, I prefer a mixed method, but it either had to be quantitative, dealing with numbers, or qualitative and just taking all this information and finding similarities through coding it and finding out what sticks out. And there were a lot of servant style thoughts, but there were a lot of transformational style thoughts. There were a lot of, the cowboy versus the shepherd type of leadership. Sometimes some people, the rough and ragged cattle, you got to whip them into shape sometimes, right? And it's hard, because leadership's not always a hug. Leadership it's just hard work and adaptability, and what works for one person may not work for the other. I just think leadership theory is a good basis, as a foundation to talk about what it is. And then a lot of it is teaching and experience and the good old storytelling. We forget how much history can tell us, which was some of the great, I felt like when we partnered up, and just some of the little things that you put in about history, and it just makes it so much more relevant, and people understand it more when you can make some kind of comparison. And that's what I loved about your book too. Not that I'm trying to plug your book here, but it was just having those stories and being able to share those stories and not just say, oh, you got to be a servant leader. Well, what does that mean? You have to share those things. You have to model it. And to your point, one thing I learned from you, and I really started thinking, it was like, hey, the leadership's about doing the right thing when no one's looking. Well, that's the definition of integrity too. So that's one part of it. But like you say, leadership is about doing the right thing when everyone's looking. Then that's leading by example. So it's really so many things. And that's why I really push the relationship side of it, because we can all relate to what it is to have good relationships and bad relationships. And that's really what leadership comes down to, being able to build those relationships and work through them.
I have to say, a lot of that comes right from when I'm looking at the article in part one, and it's not in quotations, but it can be pulled out and used. So you need to take care of your people and effectively listen, allowing for two-way communication, and debate. Right? And I think that's really, really important. And transitioning from a leadership position in a municipal fire department to a state employee as a director of a fire academy, leadership here is very different. In the municipal fire department, we have a combination department comprised of IAFF union membership and volunteers who are just working to better their community, versus a state agency where all my staff are all paid part-time employees, except for a very small core group of trainers that are full-time. And it's very different here. It's nobody's dying here. No decisions need to be made immediately. We can pump the brakes, we can slow things down, and truly find out the root cause of whatever the crisis is today, and figure it out. And sometimes we can wait till tomorrow to figure it out. But utilizing the skills that I learned as a leader in fire and EMS, and also some emergency management stuff to hear, is really transcends both, but yet it's different at the same time. And I like that. Effectively listen. Sometimes that comes the exhausting part, when you're listening to over 200 different opinions on the same thing. But being able to listen to those, to making sure everybody understands that they have a voice at the table, and at the end of the day, I'm going to make a decision that's best for the agency and best for everyone involved. But listening really pays off, dividends.
Yeah, PJ, I think that's 100% true. And, in business, and when you're at the State Fire Academy, the fire service can learn from the type of planning that you do in those capacities, because while the fire department's great at responding, the fire department in general across the country isn't great at planning. I remember one time somebody said, I wrote the chief a letter and he never got back to me. And I said, well, did you light it on fire? Because if you did, I'm not even going to pay attention to it. So both sides of the house need to learn from each other. One of the things that I think is also important to, especially for those new officers out there, is don't try to lead 100. It's good to build consensus, but you don't want to try to lead by just building a consensus. We use the quote from Henry Ford in the article that if he asked people what they really wanted, they would have said faster horses. So Henry Ford built a consensus, but he built it around his or her vision to put things forward. And I think that when you're a leader, you got to put your vision forward and build consensus and take input and change when necessary. Or if you're not the fire chief or the director of the academy, you got to take your boss's vision and implement your boss's vision with input and try to manage it and massage it. Would you like to weigh in on that, Dr. Wheeler?
Sure. Yeah, the vision is everything, and that's where that organizational design and alignment starts. And that's where you say, when we really talk about if we're going to effectively have leadership in a department based on the culture, because to PJ's point, it is different, right? Like the leadership principles there are, we can apply them, and some different styles might work better with others, but it's the culture that's different, right? And it's like the time to build your leadership. Your leadership and your clout with your team is not on the fireground. It starts in the firehouse, right? And it starts with your reputation and who you are and how you carry yourself, and integrity, and all those things that go along with what people think is an effective leader. But coming into an academy role, coming off of an engine company for 8 years, and you come into an academy role, you're now in that administrative world, and it really clicks even more, because it's like, you may not like what we have to do. And I always used to tell my guys this, it's like, you may not like what we have to do, but at the end of the day, this is the vision of the fire chief. This is what we're supposed to do. And that's part of leadership. It's not just gaining consensus out of popularity because you want to be the cool person. You know, being that leader that keeps everyone safe and keeps the train on the tracks is very important. And I think that's where a lot of people start to struggle between the popularity contest and, you know, I'm going to be one of the guys or whatever, to that transition to that next level, whether it be administrative or whatever. It's part of, you have to support that vision. That's still your job as an officer, or, you know, whatever administrative role that you take. And I think that's probably one of the hardest transitions I see in the fire service. But no organization exists, especially Fortune 50, 500 companies, if people get too far off the vision and just go do their own thing, they'll fail and they'll go out of business. And you know, that can't happen. Seems like people always need the fire department, but it will eventually come back and bite you in some other way if, you know, you don't do the right thing.
And every one of us has a boss somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the higher you get up in the organization, the more bosses you tend to have. And that's one of those leadership traps, is somebody thinks, okay, I'm in charge of the academy now, I make all the decisions, or I'm the company officer or the chief, I make all the decisions, not realizing it's a double funnel of responsibility. The higher you get up, you're getting it from both directions. Would you agree with that, PJ?
I absolutely. And I also think what a lot of it comes down to is having that vision, or having a plan, just not coming in and shooting from your hip. You know, a lot of what we do on the emergency side, you have to shoot from your hip because you're responding to things that are occurring in front of you. In the administrative role, it's planning for that stuff, knowing that it's going to happen, and being able to have that vision 1, 2, 3, 4 years out. You know, and Frank, and you sat with me, you know, prior to accepting this position, when I was just preparing for this position and putting a 5-year plan together. You know, so on day one, when I came in for my interview, I had a 5-year plan for the academy. And Frank, you know, we haven't caught up lately on it, but I'll have to tell you, there's not much left in that 5-year plan. There's been a lot more stuff added to it, but a lot of the things that we worked on, you know, 2.5, 3 years ago, are already checked off and are in motion or are complete. You know, as I came in with a plan, I came in on a plan from what I was going to do on day one for the first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, first year, and then just instituting it, sticking to it, even with all the other noise and all those other things that occur every day that we have to insert, we have to handle.
And I'd like to get Dr. Wheeler's input on this, because I think it was brilliant, not only that you put together a 5-year plan, but it was a foundation, but it wasn't the whole house. You were willing to let others have input to actually build the house off that foundation. And one of the things that PJ did that I thought was great was and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but he met with his essential, what we would consider his command staff first. And then he met with every single instructor to get input so that he can adjust his plan. Would that be fair to say, PJ, is how you did it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Dr. Wheeler?
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I think that is, you know, when you talk about it out loud, we all know how hard it is and how hard it is to keep that train on the tracks. I mean, you have political things that are going on, you have bosses, you have budgets, you have all these things. And so you can't really be focused on this one plan and you know, that you're not willing to change. That's where the adaptability comes in. And I always say, who knows best than the people around you, right? Like that's how I personally figure out like what kind of training we should be doing. You go to the field, they're the boots on the ground. They know what they need. And that's really the way to do it. You come in with a plan. I'm all about planning processes and aligning those processes with policy and being transparent about it and communicating about it and being open and listening to people to go, yeah, that sounds great, but it's not going to work because, okay, how can we make it work? And that's where, you know, and I'm the same way. I'm like, here's the plan, here's my timeline, and you got to just be open to adjust, or you may never, I'm guessing PJ's meeting those points because he is open and adjustable and doing what he needs to do to get the plan done instead of going, nope, I wanted it this way. And that's the way it's going to go. To me, that's the secret to failure. I mean, that's how I view it. I mean,
I agree. How would we help communicate that to a firefighter today who's looking at a lieutenant promotion, right? We're talking about planning on the big administrative side. Well, a new lieutenant coming in that role, or a new lieutenant going to captain role, right? They're planning for that new assignment, that new company, that new firehouse. What are some of those things that you recommend that should go into their thought process of that plan and building that foundation?
So I think going into that, right? So one of the big things I've made, and I have a really great assistant chief and battalion chief here that support me in the role, is the very first part of the plan starts in the academy, right? And I think we're bringing the people out of the academy. They're riding the front seat of the ambulance, and that's really where they're at. And we kind of have a negative connotation to riding the ambulance, right? Everyone wants to ride the fire truck and go to the fire. But we're taking these people out with almost no time on the job. We're putting them in the piece of apparatus that runs the most calls, and they're in the thick of it. They need to understand that they're leaders at that point, right? They need to understand that they're leaders. We need to communicate our expectations from them. What our incident response policy looks like, what the vision of the department is, what it looks like, what does it mean to be an officer? And I think that's where, and we know this, we're falling a little short on that, right? We don't explain to them what it is to be an officer. And so if the department's not setting that up, and it's something we're working on that building block approach, like in strategy and tactics, we will go over the incident response policy. And this is what the expectations are. This is why this is important. The why is the big thing. Why do we want you to know these things? And then you get to your next promotional, let's call it a class that you need for promotion. We need to be giving them that information, explaining to them what it means to be an officer and what it means to be a leader. And that's that building a block approach that we need to give them. With that not there, I mean, it's mentorship, it's being able to talk to them. I mean, I have people that come to me now and they're like, I don't think I want to be an officer, this and that, and it's so much responsibility, and this is the breath after they maybe had a complaint about something, and it's, you empower them and say, well, if you really want to affect change, the only way you're going to be able to affect change is get to that next level. And we need to empower them. Some of the things that we're doing here, from a training academy side of things, and then I see a lot of officers do, or for us, the master firefighter is that technician level, the driver of apparatus, is to engage these people into training and have them train and give them responsibility on the shift, so they feel like they're accomplishing something, and raise them up, say, that's a great job, and just think about this when you become an officer. I mean, it's mentorship. It's giving them the right tools that they need and then mentoring them through. That's just my opinion now. Like I said, we're getting formal things in places. We have our company officer leadership academy, but we don't run it all the time because of funding sometimes, right? So some new lieutenants get it, some don't. So it's really hard to try to, when the programs don't exist, what do you do? And that's where that leadership portion comes in, where you just have to say, where do we need this person to be? And then you need to meet them where they're at and take them where they need to go, is something I say a lot. I don't know if a lot of that makes sense. It's my opinion on how things are. And we are starting to work to where we're actually giving them the right classes and giving them the information and the same information, so it catches on and it becomes more second nature.
No, I think what you're saying, I think what you're saying has a lot of value, because I think it is true throughout the American Fire Service. We wait too long to train our leaders. We need to train them before they get on that ambulance, because they are making life and death decisions that really impact our customers directly head on. Where else can you make that unbelievable impact on the community than being on the ambulance? And you're making decisions on the fly. So I think that it goes back to, if you want to be the officer that never has to wash their plate when you're having lunch, Well, and you have to be the firefighter who never let an officer wash their plate when you were a firefighter. And they have to know that you're always being watched, and just carry yourself with that degree of professionalism. And it's going to pay dividends when you do become an officer. One thing I want to bring up on that we were talking about, PJ's great tactic there is a trap in that tactic. And I want to make sure that we get the counter side to it, because I've seen chiefs make this mistake and it go horribly wrong, where they think, I'm going to come into a position, I want to understand the ground truth, I have my plan, I'm going to meet with everybody. But instead of meeting with the command staff first, they immediately go on the floor and meet with the firefighters. That's a mistake, because if you just do that, what happens is your command staff is now hearing your vision through a firefighter, and it actually undermines your command and creates rumors. So take PJ's thing, meet with your top people first, then meet with the firefighters, then meet with your top people again. That's going to kill any rumors. And make sure that when you're meeting with all your subordinates, you don't have to be a robot. But one thing you'll notice in politics, you'll hear the same politicians say the same thing, and they just get new crowds. They're saying the same thing. There's a reason why you stay on message. When you have a meeting with subordinates, and it's going to be multiple subordinates, you want to stay within a certain framework of what your message is, because you don't want to be creating rumors. You want to make sure you're communicating clear and concise. Now to Dr. Wheeler's point on mentoring, and then I'll go to PJ, is we always need to mentor individuals. And I think that the fire service got it right. They see the shiny star on the shift, the girl or guy who's really excelling, coming in, doesn't need to be hovered over. And we always ask the people that do a great job to do more. And I think one of the traps is the people that don't want to do anything. A lot of leaders, and a lot of good leaders, they ignore them. And it was a battalion chief in Wallingford, Connecticut, who taught me this. He said, listen, if you're going to mentor somebody and it's outside of your shift, and his name's Chris Sunwall, he said, pick the rising star, pick somebody that's going to make you better. But if you're the boss on a shift, watch over the person that's doing great, support them, but they don't need as much attention. The real work, the real leadership work is in the margins. Pick somebody that's in the margins, that's just there, and try to build them up and try to find out what motivates them. I'll go to PJ and Dr. Wheeler.
Yeah, Frank, I agree regarding that trap. And, we discussed this prior, and the way I handled that here was I was meeting regularly with, we'll say, the essential, the full-time staff, and talking about vision, talking about plan. But then I was meeting with all the part-time staff, the 200 or so part-time per diem instructors over a course of a couple months. Really was held my cards close to my chest as far as the plan and the vision. That was just intel gathering. Then I scheduled department-wide meetings. I think I did like 8 different meetings and had the same message of the vision and the plan going forward. So all the full-time staff, they knew what was going on a regular basis. They knew the intel I was grabbing. They knew the plan. They knew the foundation that I wanted to bring forward. And then it was all intel. And then I shared that plan and vision at once over a period of 2 weeks with all the staff. It seemed to go over very, very well. And then the thing that we haven't discussed is continuing that communication piece. So, Shelley, what we decided to do was, too much email comes out of the academy to my instructors. That was one complaint I heard on a regular basis, that, listen, we don't even read half the stuff because it's too much. We see the academy, we just delete. So we've worked really hard to limit the email communication. And once a month, I put out I hate to even say newsletter, but it's more of a video message to all the staff of what's going on. My goal was 4 to 6 minutes. They're upwards of 8 to 10 minutes sometimes, but I try to keep them as short as possible, just so there's that communication on a monthly basis, so they can hear from my perspective what's going on, what has happened, what's coming up, to try to continue that open line of communication.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I love about that, and I think it's what we fall into sometimes, that communicating that plan with just your direct staff. I think there's been times, and I've watched a lot of things fall apart because it's like, okay, here's the plan, here's what we're going to do, here's what we're trying to figure out. And then you put together a committee of 15 people with, a lot of people don't know how to facilitate a committee. You have 15 different thought processes, and then you're spinning your wheels and you never get anywhere. Right. And so the people that work the closest, and we're really bare bones here, it's one of the things that we do too. And I think we're just more successful at it because there will be a naysayer about everything. Running acquired structures. I love my instructors, but we do something a little off the cuff as far as what's normal training. I always say, we give them a scenario, and when the units come in, their decision drives the scenario. We're not looking for a specific outcome. We want to make decision makers, and then we'll talk about it a little after, right? And every time there's a couple people, but what if we, so you kind of got to just, especially when you're building something new, I think you kind of got to hold it close, go with the plan. To PJ's point, here's the plan. I know it's a good plan. I know I need to be adaptable. Let's get it to where it needs to be. And I think it was my husband that always brought up the 80% rule. Like, we can't try to roll something out at 100%. It will never happen. You get to that 80%, and then you're open enough and you communicate with people, you listen to people, and just through listening to people, right? If you're kind of on point for the most part. There's always going to be the outlier out there, or someone complaining because the sky's blue. It's just the nature of the business. But then you can go through and use those people that, the part-time people to start tweaking it and get a little, always make it better. But so I like that plan. That makes sense to me. It's kind of how I feel like that's how an organization will always be successful. Right.
I have two more things to add, and then I got to check out for another meeting. But the one area where I don't want to say that I failed, but in the 1 year, I forgot to come back to them. I got so caught up in what was going on. I didn't do meetings, academy-wide meetings for all the instructors. So I just finished 2 years, and we're scheduling those meetings now. So I'm a little behind, but continuing that communication going forward. But I think a lieutenant or a captain or a battalion chief or shift commander, they can do the same thing. We're talking about a much bigger scale. Where you're going into a new firehouse, right? Meet with the captain of that house, meet with the battalion chief of that house, meet with the chief officers, understand their vision, their goal, then begin communicating with your staff, your engine company staff, your truck company, not coming in and changing, day one, all right, we're making these changes. We're not going to start off on the wrong foot. Being open, listening to the company, listening to what challenges they may have, and maybe a completely different district that you're not familiar with, right? Sitting back, listening to your membership of who you're going to be leading, and then work together. On an engine company, work together to put the plan together. You get some more buy-in from your membership if they feel as they've contributed to that plan.
PJ, that's very well said. We are at the witching hour here for this Politics and Tactics Hangout. Dr. Wheeler has been a great guest, and Dan about our update on Swiftwater Rescue and Connecticut's Task Force 1. I do have to apologize. I made the mistake. I invited Chief Gibson on with Dr. Wheeler, and I gave him the wrong date. And Shelley was able to say, okay, I'll make it today anyway. So we're going to have them both back because they're writing another article for Fire Engineering on training in acquired structures, which is a great topic. So we'll have both of them back soon. That's it for Politics and Tactics today. We're going to give Dr. Wheeler the last word, and then we'll go to PJ and we'll wrap this up. Dr. Wheeler?
I just really appreciate the collaboration on the article and having the chance to come on here and talk about leadership and getting the word out. I think we're all very like-minded. I think a lot of good came out of today, and I just really appreciate it, and I hope we can work together some more.
Absolutely. The honor was mine. PJ, last word?
Yeah, thank you, Doctor. It was a great conversation. Just change gears real quick. Frank and I just finished up reviewing FDIC proposals for 24, and now I know the executive board will begin meeting to look at all of our feedback. If you submitted, well done. I think this is I don't know how many years I've been doing this, but this was one of the hardest years. Saw some great submissions, some great classes. Unfortunately, not all of us will be selected. And listen, last year I had a class that wasn't selected, so we don't know what's up, but continue submitting. If you submitted a class for 24, write an article. If you're looking for some guidance, reach out to Frank or I or anybody on the FDIC board to help you format that, push that forward, because that's the best path to get your class and information out there. So if you are selected, you already have some of your information out there, already have some following, increases your attendance. So job well done. It was a very interesting year of doing reviews because there was a real lot of quality out there. So thank you for taking the time to submit.
Very well said, PJ. Mark, take us off, and we'd like to thank Mark Hoff for producing this from behind the scenes. And the guy used to open up for Kiss in a band. I mean, open up for Kiss. And yet we have this music in the beginning of this that's just atrocious. So we're going to challenge Mark and his leadership ability to come up with a new rockin' song for the opening of our Hump Day Hangout. Thanks, Mark. That's it for Politics and Tactics today. Thanks to Dr. Wheeler and Director of the Connecticut Fire Academy, PJ Norwood. Have a great day.